to another video. Today I'm hoping to make a very cute faux denim jacket. Let me explain. So a couple of weeks ago I made these overalls out of this very cute pink canvas, and I have some fabric left, and I was thinking that this would make the cutest faux denim jacket. Obviously faux denim because it's canvas. So I want to use this canvas from Minerva.com. It's their core range washed cotton canvas in the color Dusky pink. For the pattern, I want to use this jacket pattern from Burda. This is from their April 2022 magazine. It's like a denim jacket, like cut, silhouette, top stitching, the whole thing. But they did make it out of a jacquard, which again gives it this very like feminine and like romantic vibe. And I'm kind of going for that, you know? I want it to look sort of like a denim jacket, but also want it to be really cute and feminine. I already have all of the pattern pieces ready to go because I have made this before. And yeah, I think a lightweight jacket is going to be great for spring and summer. It's going to be a great addition to my wardrobe, and I think it's going to look really cute. That's a really big intro. That's a lot of rambling. I'm going to go and get started, I guess. Okay, so I'm starting off by cutting my fabric as always. I did the pattern puzzle and then I started cutting out my fabric. Once I have all of my pattern pieces cut out, I started transferring any markings onto the fabric. I'm using a mixture of heat erasable pens and stitch marking. Okay, so today we have a bit of a different setup because my partner needs the office to work. So usually we try to schedule kind of around what each other needs at work, but today that wasn't possible, so I need to be sewing and he needs to be doing stuff. So this was the compromise we came to. I'm going to be working from the living room. Hopefully it'll still be easy to understand what I'm doing and all of that. So I've got to do the interfacing and then we can start actually sewing. And my plan is to interface the pieces that need interfacing and then serge everything so I don't really have to use the serger really at any point. It's just easier to set up just one machine instead of having to change between the two. So I went ahead and cut out the interfacing for the jacket and fused it to the pieces as well. Then I had to read the instructions because I had a feeling that both of the collar pieces needed to be interfaced, but I had only cut out interfacing for one of them. So I was just double checking. And yes, both collar pieces do need to be interfaced. Usually I put all of the pieces that need to be interfaced to one side as I'm unpinning the pattern pieces from the fabric, but one of the collar pieces must have fallen off the desk and into a drawer because that's where I found it. Anyway, when I had finally interfaced everything correctly, I went ahead and serged all of the raw edges of all of the pieces. And on a quick unrelated note, the shorts I'm wearing here I didn't make on camera, but I have a similar pair made on a video which is linked in the card above. It's the Barbie video. They're the eucalyptus shorts from Mood Fabrics, and this is a free pattern, and I used a lightweight denim from Minerva.com and some adorable daisy trim. I made these back in October last year because it was still very much warm enough for shorts, and I can tell you they're going to be a summer staple for me. That's done. I've got all of my pieces serged, so now I'm going to get started on the pocket. And the instructions say to serge or like finish the edges, then to fold along this line here. There's a little mark here, and we have to fold along this line. I am gonna press this with the iron, but we have to baste the sides. Just gonna press that real quick. So next we have to fold the bottom. So the sides is gonna be sewn when we stitch this to the other pieces. So we only need to do the bottom. I'm gonna go ahead and fold in the seam allowances on these bottom edges. And that's exactly what I did. I used my seam gauge and pressed in that seam allowance. Then it was time to pin the pocket to the center front pieces, but I realized that I had marked the pocket placement line on the wrong side of the fabric when I actually needed on the right side. So I quickly put in some stitch marking so that I could see it on both sides. I also realized that if I wanted to add top stitching to the pocket opening, I had to do it before I sew it on. So I set up my top stitching thread and changed my needle to get started with the sewing. Top stitching thread is thicker and creates a more textured look, like on jeans, and the bigger needle is necessary due to the thicker thread, but also not a bad idea to sew a canvas or denim with a bigger needle size anyway. Here I'm using size 100, but you could also use 90. The thread on the bottom bobbin is regular thread and only your top thread gets changed out. I went ahead and pinned the pockets to the center front pieces and top stitched them down along that bottom edge. Then I could start putting the fronts together. I pinned each side front to a center front with right sides together, and then a front piece on the other edge of each center front piece, again with right sides together. Okay, let's do some batch pinning / sewing. I've got my fronts together. While we're here, I'm also gonna go ahead and get started on my back pieces, because why not, you know? My center back, place that with the right side facing me, and then I'm just gonna pin the side back to each side with right sides together, of course. If I was more familiar with this pattern, I would do a bit more, because I feel like I could do the collar, I could do the facings, maybe even get started on the sleeves. Even though I have made this before, it was a long time ago. It was well over a year ago. So I'm gonna take it slow and kind of figure it out as I'm going along, because I really don't want to make silly mistakes on this, because I really do want this to turn out very good. So I'm gonna do a little bit of batch sewing here and there where I am confident that I can do that. Make sure that I'm not being too confident, if you know what I mean. So yes, then it was time to stitch those seams in place, and for these seams I am using my regular polyester thread on both the top and the bottom. And when I had all of those seams sewn up, I pressed them too. I pressed the front seams away from the center front and the back seams open. Then I added some top stitching. For the back, I added 1 row on each side of each seam, and for the fronts, I only added 1 row on the outer side of the seams. Next, I pinned each front yoke to its respective front piece, and I also pinned the back yoke to the back piece. I stitched those in place and pressed the seams towards the yokes. And then, you guessed it, I added a row of top stitching to the yoke side of each of those seams. Now it's time to pin a front-facing piece to each front, but I was a little unsure as to how this was all going to work out because I couldn't remember the construction from my previous making of this. So I went to my closet and fetched the jacket so I could check. And yes, it's supposed to be pinned along that long edge, and it does make the neckline look really weird at the moment, but it's a trust the process kind of thing. I stitched that in place and pressed the seam allowance toward the facing. Then I folded the facing over to the inside along the marked fold line and pressed that in place. Then I top stitched along that seam on the side of the facing, but keeping the facing free. And now I'm about to make a mistake and I want to play a guessing game, so you can maybe pause the video and leave me a comment guessing what it is. Okay, ready? I misunderstood the instructions, so that when I pinned the fronts and backs together at the shoulders and sides, I also pinned the facings at the shoulders, and I really wasn't supposed to. What the instructions mean is that we are supposed to pin the shoulder seams of the front and back and also pin the shoulder seams of the front and back facings, but separately, you know, as two individual things. I will let you know when I realize this, but I just thought I'd give you a heads up in case you're making this with me so you learn from my mistakes. Of course, I ignorantly stitched that in place and pressed the seams too. I pressed the shoulder seams towards the back and the side seams open. And here I am trying it on, blissfully unaware of my mistake, but it is looking very cute, so that's something at least. The next day I was back in my desk, so we're back to our white background, and I am getting started with the collar. It's a very simple collar. We simply pin the pieces with right sides together and sew along the outer edges, leaving the neck edge free. The neck edge is usually the shorter, rounded, or like curved side, and also I am using my seam gauge and Frixion pen to mark the intersection of the seam allowances, so seam allowance on each side that I'm sewing, so that I know exactly where the corner is. Once I've sewn that in place, I trimmed the seam allowances and clipped the corners. And then I turn the collar right side out, turning out those corners with my point turner for a really nice crisp finish. And I press all of that in place. And of course, I top stitched the collar around the edges. If you're making this and you want to use top stitching thread like me, you need to figure out which one is your top collar piece and your under collar piece, just so you know how to top stitch, so that you don't end up with like the bottom thread on the top and vice versa. Well, I mean, vice versa is what you want. But yeah, now is the moment when I figured out that I had done this wrong, that I should have done the facings earlier. I was going to stitch the facings on now, along with the collar, which is actually the very common construction for a lot of like blouses and dresses and stuff. But yeah, I was like reading the instructions over and over. I was looking at the jacket and I was like, what am I doing wrong? And then I realized that, yeah, the facings shouldn't have been stitched at the shoulder to the rest of the jacket. They should have been, you know, stitched to the other facing. Yeah, so I had to go ahead and unpick that, which is fine, you know. Yeah, I'll show you how I actually do that now. First things first, I went extra cautious to avoid future mistakes, because the only thing worse than having to unpick something is having to unpick the same thing multiple times. So I marked the little numbers that Burda uses on their patterns on each facing piece. Then I pinned the shoulders of the facings together, and I also pinned the unpicked section of the jacket shoulders. I stitched all of those seams and pressed the facing seam allowances open and the shoulders towards the back. Now that I have all of that in properly, I can actually attach the collar. So this is a little bit confusing to explain, but I'm going to do my best. The collar is pinned in between the jacket and the facings, a little collar sandwich, if you will. I found it helpful to pin the collar to the jacket first and then pin the facings to that. I used clips because stuff is starting to get really bulky. You want to pin the under collar towards the jacket, and the facings are going to be right sides with the upper collar. The collar is not going to reach the edges of your facings, especially the front facings, but you do want to stitch all the way from the very edge of the facings, you know, sandwiching the collar in all the way to the other edge of the facings so that you create a nice finish while you're at it. Then I trimmed the seam allowances and clipped the corners and turned everything right side out and added my tag to the back facing while I waited for my iron to warm up. When pressing curved areas like this, I find it very helpful to use my tailor's ham. I'll link it below for you. I'm first pressing the seam allowances and facings down, and then taking a second pass to press the collar in place, as this is quite a bulky area. And before I move on, I'm going to just tack the facings down at the shoulder seams by hand. Now I added a top stitch to the opening edge of the front facing, and I do think it looks good, but I'm still not sure now is the best time to do it. Next, I'm going to tackle the waistband, and this is why in hindsight I think I should have waited to add that last top stitch, because I now need to unpick the area of the seam allowance to be able to sew my waistband properly. I marked the seam allowance on the short edges of the waistband so that I knew where the opening edges needed to line up. Then I pinned the waistband to the jacket with right sides together. I also pinned each undersleeve to its respective upper sleeve, but only up to the mark where the sleeve opening will be. Then I stitched those seams in place. When pressing, I pressed the seam allowances of the waistband down towards the waistband, and I also pressed the seam allowances of the other edge of the waistband in. Next, I folded the waistband on itself with right sides together and pinned the short edges closed. I stitched those short edges down, making sure my stitching lined up with the opening edge of the jacket for a seamless finish. Then I trimmed the seam allowances and clipped the corners before turning them out. I pressed the corners as well as the whole waistband in place, making sure the folded edge covered the stitching line on the inside of the jacket. On the outside, I pinned the waistband, making sure to catch the folded edge underneath to make top stitching it easier. I also finally pressed the sleeves, pressing the seam allowances towards the upper sleeve as well as the unstitched bits at the opening. Then it was on to top stitching the waistband all around as well as the sleeve seam on the side of the upper sleeve. I pinned the sleeve closed and stitched it down. Using my seam roll, I pressed those seam allowances open. Now it's time to add the cuff, and basically I'm doing it exactly the same as the waistband. I pinned it in place, making sure that the seam allowances of the short edges of the cuff extend past the opening edges of the sleeve, and stitched that down. Pressed the seam allowances towards the cuff, then press the seam allowances in on the remaining long edge of the cuff and pin the short edges with right sides together. Stitch the short edges together, clip the seam allowances and clip the corners, turn them right side out, and press it all in place. Then I just had to top stitch all around the cuff, making sure to catch the folded edge on the inside. We're in the final stretch now. All there's left to do is attach the sleeves and do the buttons. So for the sleeves, I start by pinning them in place, matching the notches and the underarm seams, and pulling all of the excess ease into a little box pleat at the shoulder. I stitched the sleeves in place and then pressed the seam allowances towards the sleeve with the help of my tailor's ham. At this point, I got out my box of snap buttons and I realized I did not have enough of matching or even coordinating colors, so I had to quickly run to the craft store to get some, where I also accidentally acquired some yellow yarn for a 1940s knitted blouse. To add the snaps, I use my awl to poke through the fabric along the markings, then I follow the instructions. There's two kinds of bits that you add to the flat-headed bits. So you add one type to one side of the jacket and the other type to the other so that they can snap to each other, you know? I use this plier contraption to set them in place, and I'm doing them along the front opening edges and also adding one to each cuff. And yes, once I'd done that, I was ready for the reveal. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I love it so much. I think it's so cute. I think this pink is gonna go with so many things in my wardrobe. I already have a bunch of things that I want to style it with. It's obviously not the most vintagey thing, although it's not retro. You know what I mean? Like, it has like a retro vibe. I think this fabric is perfect for this jacket. I'm really happy I don't have to do any top stitching for the foreseeable future. I know I just did 2 top stitching projects really close together, and that was on me. Like, I know I decide what I make. Like, I had the thread, I had the fabric, I thought it was a good time to make this, but I'm also happy not to have to do top stitching, because it's not that it's a hard technique per se, it's just that it takes a while. Like, you're constantly switching thread, you're constantly having to figure out tension things, because obviously if you're using thicker thread on the top and then you're switching to a different thread, and you're just constantly having to troubleshoot, really, and switching threads and all of this stuff, and it's just long. Have you made a jacket like this? Are you planning on it? I know that some people commented on my videos of talking about how I'm making this project, that you have this pattern and that you have similar fabrics. So I'm really excited to see you make it, and hopefully this video will help you with the construction and help maybe some questions you might have, or have just you have now a companion who's also struggling through with making Burda patterns. So, you're not alone. So yeah, if you do make this jacket, I would love to see it. So if you post a photo, tag me on it. So if you want to watch me make short form content and also stories and more everyday things, you can go ahead and follow me on Instagram or TikTok. I have both of those linked below for you. Thank you so much for Minerva for sending me this fabric to work with. I loved working with this fabric. That's it for today. If you learned something new in this video, or you just enjoyed hanging out with me, make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss new videos. I post every Wednesday I post every Friday at 4 p.m. GMT, or now it's BST because it's time changed. Insomnia has been so bad this week. I'm struggling a little bit with words. Okay. That is everything for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.